Welcome in, Tiger fans, to the Go 24/7 podcast. As we're out here in the what parking lot number is this, Glen? 404. 404.
404.
Parking lot 404, right here next to the stadium. My name is Bryce Koon, alongside Glen West, where we just wrapped up another day of spring practice. The weather's nice. We're getting kind of later into the spring practice dates, and this week we got the chance to obviously talk with Joe Sloan and Blake Baker, just fresh off talking with defensive coordinator Blake Baker. So we'll talk about that and touch on that. But Glen, let's start with kind of what we've seen here so far. Jokingly, it hasn't been too in-depth with what we've seen in spring practice, but I think there are some things we could glean on, things we've seen. I'll kind of kick off here. I mentioned it to you when we were doing the viewing portion of practice today. I've just been impressed with Weston Davis. That was a question mark coming in at one of the tackle spots. Impressed with his development, the way he looks, his body, and just, feels like he's kind of been one of the few cemented guys, I guess we could say, at the offensive line spot.
Yeah, well, I think one of the common themes we've seen in practice here, that's kind of stayed true these first couple of weeks, is the returning guys aren't letting these transfers just come in and steal their spots. I know it takes some time for those transfers to learn the playbook, and we're still super early in spring, but you've seen Braylon Moore still at second team center. DJ Chester hadn't given that up. Josh Thompson has now been on the roster or with the team for a couple practices now, and he's been working at backup right tackle, backup left tackle today. I think those guys that are returners that have been in the program, are not going to make it easy for those guys to come in and just steal those spots. But I do eventually think that we're going to get to a point there where Thompson and Koon are both in the lineup.
Gotta love that.
But those two guys are going to certainly find their footing and be a part of this thing. But I think overall the offensive line has just done so much mixing and matching that it's hard to take anything you see with such a huge grain of salt right now. I think you're going to wait until we get back in the fall and these guys have a whole summer of kind of working together on the field on their own and seeing who kind of stands out in that respect when they get back. But you mentioned offensive line. I'll probably take it to the secondary. I think for me, again, another case, we've seen Ashton Stamps still very much in the picture at the first team cornerback. And so they've got a lot of guys here that they're still continuing to rotate in. But, Monster Delane has been in the first team at times. Jakeem Jackson has been with the first team at times. Guy we just talked with Blake Baker about was not only just Monster Delane, but Michael Turner is a second-year returner.
He had a pick last week.
Had a pick in one of the practices and has looked really crisp. So I think coming in, we wanted to see. I think there were a few position groups that we kind of highlighted that we wanted to see kind of what the rotations would look like. Offensive line was one. The secondary at both safety and cornerback has been one. Defensive line has been another. I think the transfers on the defensive line, particularly at pass rusher, have really kind of asserted themselves here early in camp. And, they had to replace a lot there. So you could see why Jack Pyburn, why Patrick Payton are already kind of in that first-team grouping. And Gabriel Relaford, I think, is another guy that's made a huge jump in year two with his consistency and is going to be a huge part of this thing come fall.
Yeah, you mentioned, obviously, the defense there, and I thought it was interesting. We talked with Blake Baker today, and the biggest thing he said is a lot of individual drill work. And we've seen that on both sides of the football. We've kind of joked about it. The offensive line's right there in front of us. I feel like we've watched that 2-on-1 combo drill for the past 3 weeks. Yeah. But just in terms of, talking about what the coaches have said, let's start kind of with what we saw earlier this week from Joe Sloan, who, once again, staying in the joking side of things, had a lot to say to the media. He doesn't get to talk all that often, so he's got to dump it in the spring and dump it in the fall once every couple months. So Joe Sloan talked about a lot of different things, the progression of Garrett Nussmeier from year one to year two as a starter. And Glenn, I kind of want to start there because I think it is an intriguing thing that maybe we're not talking so much about because, yes, there are question marks at different positions. But with Garrett Nussmeier, it's a total different mindset now. And I love that, he said this. He's not looking at practice film. He's not looking at garbage time film. He's looking at film over the course of a full season that kind of gives him a different vantage point of he needs to build off of and what he wanted to see.
Yeah, look, I think the thing with Nuss here that you just wanted to see was just kind of him commanding the offense and kind of what that looked like in year two. And whether it's talking with Sloan, whether it was talking with Nuss himself a couple weeks ago, some of these other offensive players that are back from last year's team, they say he's just got a big much better command of the offense, and that's to be expected when you're coming back for a second year, and this is kind of the big money year for him in terms of getting into those big time conversations in postseason, and then certainly with what his professional future looks like. But I've been really impressed with him so far. I think he's done a nice job of spreading the ball around. We've only had really a full practice and a half of really kind of being able to view some of these other 7-on-7, 11-on-11, 1-on-1 situations, and he's threading the needle on a lot of these passes. He's putting the ball in some aggressive spots. I'll put it nicely in that way. But so far they haven't resulted in a ton of turnovers like we saw at this time a year ago, where he was trying things out and seeing what stuck. And I think he just has a much better command of what he wants to do, where he wants the football to go, and certainly he's got a plethora of weapons to throw to, whether it's the returners and Aaron Anderson, Xavier Thomas, and several others, and then of course the transfers, Barry and Brown. The one thing we haven't seen a whole lot of, or one guy we haven't seen a whole lot of yet, is Nick Anderson, which I am a little bit disappointed, because he's kind of my guy. I've been slamming on the horn for really ever since they got him committed and signed. So I don't think it's anything serious. He's been out there with the team, with the receivers in full pads for the entirety of spring ball, but they just have not really gotten him involved in a way that I thought they would have in spring, and that could just be him coming back from injury, and they're still kind of trying to take it easy with him. So
as well as learning the offense.
Yeah, and learning the offense too. So you've seen him kind of more with the second/third teamers, and really not doing much even in those situations. So like I said, it's still early. The first team offense really has been very consistent in terms of skills players. It's been Thomas, it's been Anderson, it's been Chris Hilton, Trey'Dez Green, Keaton Durham, and Nussmeier's getting all those guys involved. And so I've been really impressed by the command that he's had with the offense so far, and they've had some really bright moments, I think, the first couple weeks of camp.
Can't forget about Fat, right? Destin Hill, who is honestly, I'll say this, and I'll be real about it. When we looked at the wide receiver class, the portal haul, I didn't really have Destin Hill ahead of guys like Nick Anderson, Barry and Brown. And Barry and Brown's been electric, and you've seen from the social media clips, he's going to be a fan favorite pretty early on. But Destin Hill has seen a lot of run and was a dynamic athlete in high school. Brian Kelly talked about the fact that he kind of got here late in the process to be able to recruit him. When he went in the portal, they were like, yeah, that's a guy we want to try to get to come back if he's ever interested in coming back at LSU. That marriage has obviously kind of been made there as well. And you mentioned, we haven't talked a lot about the running backs. It kind of is what it is. Caleb Jackson. Kelly said that it was a weight issue, kind of what we'd heard and rumored all throughout the season last year. But obviously, you have Caleb Jackson, you've got Caden Durham, Harlem Berry's there. You're going to get Lindsey, in the summer. I think that you feel good about that position. You got a lot of talent. You got to kind of figure out what they work with. Offensive line has a lot to do with that. But let's take it over to the other side of the football, where the defense, Glenn, I asked the question today as kind of a precursor to some thoughts about I wanted to talk about was there's just a lot of speed on this defense. And obviously we talked to Blake Baker about what he brought in terms of that, linebacker hybrid safety group. You mentioned the secondary there as well. But the defensive line is going to be the big question. It's, if you've waited this long to listen to the podcast, we haven't talked about it. Well, here we go. Baker talked about the depth needed there. Sydir Mitchell is a space eater. They need him to be a guy, and I feel like he's looked pretty good at times so far this spring.
Well, you want to talk about the 2-on-1 drills we've seen. It's mainly been in those drills. It's been two offensive linemen against one defensive lineman, and whatever two offensive linemen they're putting against Mitchell, they're not getting much push on him. Like, he is a massive man to be able to move, and so I think he's going to be a huge space eater. And the one thing I will say, and we haven't touched on yet, because I do think it's probably the most important thing you want to see from this team in terms of growth. It's in the run game, not only on offense but on defense as well. I mean, this team has got to get better at limiting the explosive runs, not allowing quarterbacks and running backs to be able to break into the second level and just weave in and out of the defense. So you're going to need guys like Sydir Mitchell to be able to clog up some of those lanes. You're going to need some of those linebackers like Whit Weeks when he gets back healthy. For West Weeks, Devon Keys, some of these guys to be able to fill those lanes a little bit better. You're going to need Harold Perkins on the perimeter a little bit more, being able to kind of slow and kind of close those gaps on the outside and not allow those quarterbacks to get on the perimeter like we saw so much last year. So it's going to be extremely important for that defense to remember to continue to be that havoc, aggressive style of getting into the backfield, but also not getting too out of their gaps and not getting too, kind of out of position on those running plays. So I don't know that we've seen a ton to kind of say one way or the other. Like this group looks a lot better in terms of that, but it's going to be extremely important, and that's why you bring in a guy like Pyburn. I know you mentioned him earlier, but Pyburn comes from Florida, where he was kind of known, I think, as being a good run stopper on the edge, and you need some of those guys. And so, can he take that next step? Can Relaford take another step? Can Patrick Payton be a guy that's really explosive for you off the edge? It's really going to come down to the front seven for me with this LSU defense, because I do think this secondary is long, it's length, it's stronger, it's going to be able to tackle a little bit better this year with some of the new guys they brought in, but what really helps that group out in the back half is if you're able to get the kind of consistent pressure up front and get after these quarterbacks, make sure you're getting a lot of tackles for loss and kind of making offenses one-dimensional to where they have to throw it at those defensive backs. So, long-winded way of saying that I think we're still learning about this group, but it's been you can see the athleticism that you were talking about. You can see the increase in speed, the physicality, the kind of strength that they have up front, I think is really going to show itself this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when the portal opens up in the spring. Do they feel like they need to go make any additions? That'll be a talking point. I guarantee that Kelly will get asked, right after the spring game, be the last time we get the chance, or the spring event practice, whatever you want to call it, the OTA. And then just the last piece, and I wanted to touch on with the defense, and you mentioned Delane earlier, but I thought Baker spoke today about him being – like the offense has their game changers, their playmakers. Yeah. That feels like it's Delane because he can do so much for you. And especially, you don't want to get into, strict depth chart kind of projecting here, but it's like if Jakeem Jackson is the guy that and they're kind of raving about him. We've said, hey, he looks pretty good. Like, we may be the forgotten guy out there because you have, obviously, DJ Pickett. Pickett looks, as ready can be, as much you can see in the spring. If you have that, you'd fit Delane in somewhere else. Like, kind of what you're saying, Glenn, like, base level, it has to be better. It can't be much worse. And even Toviano, like, they feel like they've gotten him a spot. Spears, like, I just think the upside for this secondary, I'm not going to buy into the analyzation of spring football, but I think there is a reason to be optimistic heading into the summer and fall.
We've seen Delane a lot at corner. We've seen him at times at nickel, and I think you're going to eventually see him some back there at safety. Like there's that was one of the things that Blake Baker told us today, is that he's going to be kind of their versatile kind of Swiss Army knife guy. Mm-hmm. You're going to see him on the field a ton, and you could see him at several different positions throughout the course of the season. So I think it's really right now just kind of the entry-level stuff for him and just kind of getting him comfortable with the defensive style, comfortable with the plays, and then you can kind of maybe spread out what his versatility is going to be over the course of this summer and into the fall camp period. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's going to be interesting because we've seen Pickett. He's been with the second team mostly. I think it's only a matter of time, and I've been saying this for weeks, but just only a matter of time before he's with the first team. Like I get the feeling that LSU's really close to making that call there and making him kind of one of those first team staples at corner. You got Jakeem Jackson, who I think has been really steady, really solid for him coming off his injury. He missed all of last year too at Florida, or most of last year. And then another guy that we didn't really mention much, but Tamarcus Cooley, how he pictures in, because they spent a lot of resources on this secondary in the portal to make sure that they have an immediate improvement in that group. And whether it's at corner, whether it's at safety, whether it's at nickel, there's a lot of different juggling pieces here that they're going to have to go through. You mentioned Deshaun Spears. That was somebody that Blake Baker called out by name today. He was probably as hard on Deshaun as anybody was last year, and they're starting to see some returns on that on that harshness, I guess, or on that tough coaching, on that tough love coaching. So I think if there's a group right now that I think is going to be a candidate for most improved on the roster, I think secondary and corner is going to be right at the top of the list for me. But again, we're still very early in spring, and we just kind of have to wait and see how all this plays out, because there's a lot of mixing and matching going on right now back there.
Yeah, I really do feel like they've handled it, and if you're an NFL fan, kind of like OTAs, a lot of mixing and matching, a lot of individual work. We haven't had the chance to see a ton of 11 on 11, really. I mean, outside of that one long practice we had, we'll obviously hope to get some here after LSU gets ready to go on spring break next week. They got the spring event, and then moving some practices around. But Glenn, I think it does mean that there can be improvement, I think that you and I are just hesitant to put the stamp on it. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Well, I mean, we're not talking bad about any of these positions either. I mean, I just think it's still very much incomplete. It's an incomplete grade. I mean, we're not going to buy into anything that we haven't seen translate into games yet. And, you know, we're not going to be able to see that until week 1 at Clemson. And I think we can look at the athleticism that's on the field and say it's different, but you got to wait until you get to the games to actually see that translate onto the field.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think that's kind of the sentiment of the entire LSU fan base. Let it play on the field. It's cool to talk about all this stuff. Let's go see what it does at Clemson there in the final weekend of August. So, I guess if you made it through this, you've kind of said maybe they don't really know what they're talking about. It's just incomplete. We don't know. We're not going to put a stamp of approval on stuff. We feel like it's better. I agree with you. The athleticism, the physicality, the toughness, even the character of some of the guys. And I mean that not as a diss at previous guys, but just like we talked today, Jack Pyburn. Like that's the kind of guy you want in your program. Just I mean a little bit of nastiness, like a little bit of mean.
I mean, all these guys. I will say that was probably one of the bigger things I've taken away from player interviews in quite a while. It's just the guys that we talked to, the transfers in particular. They have a business-like approach that they're bringing into this year, and I think it's going to translate throughout the entirety of the roster. Like you asked Delane about kind of why LSU made sense for him. He's like, well, these guys, these coaches, they know how to get guys to the next level. They know how to get guys to the league. And you know, in Pyburn's case, you know, he talked about you know, not wanting to be second guessed or something throughout most of his career. He feels like he's been, you know, maybe a little bit doubted throughout a lot of his playing career at Florida, and now wants to take that next step and prove that he's an every down kind of player and not just a third down guy.
Baker talked about that
like
today,
he was at Florida. So you know, all these transfers I think have a very specific mindset that they're bringing into this season, and we'll see kind of how that relates to kind of the returners and some of the young guys they have on the roster, and how that you know, kind of propels them into the fall with what the expectations are, which is a college football playoff appearance and trying to make a deep run this year at a title.
Foundation is set in the spring, and that's what LSU is trying to do. As we got all the information and more over at Go 24/7. Make sure you hang out with us. Great 50% off deal continuing to run. Join the community. Big baseball weekend here in Baton Rouge. Mississippi State comes into town regardless of record. That's still a good ball club. You want to take 2 out of 3 from it at the very least. Men's basketball, as we recording this, Jalen Reed announces that he's coming back. That is a positive sign, you feel like, for LSU, getting him back. And, I mean, kind of begs the question of the what if he would have been able to play this past year, you know, more. So all those things and more you can find over Go 24/7 along with Glen West, myself, and Sonny Ship. And we appreciate you tuning in and watching and listening. LSU Spring Practice Report from the parking lot of 404. Come hang out with us next time. We'll have a little crowd like college game day. We can bring some people if you don't have class. I don't know. That might make us a little nervous. We'll be all right, though. Appreciate you watching. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.